So, I'm honored once again to close the Viva 2025. It's been so lovely to connect with people that I haven't met before, reconnect with friends from around the world. For me, that's a big part of what Viva's all about. It's getting to know people a bit better, hanging out in the breaks, in the meals, in the evenings. It's just so lovely. And feeling those friendships deepen over time. It's really beautiful to see that happen and to experience it myself. I do feel like this is, it's a community in a sense, but I love the fluidity of it. You know, different people come in at different times, and some people seem to disappear for a while and then they resurface. And the title of my talk, what occurred to me when Sheila and Sue asked me to do the talk, was to call it No Destination, A Journey with the Three Principles. What I had in mind, there's a quote by the writer D.H. Lawrence. He said, or he wrote, "One's destination is never a place, but rather a new way of looking at things." And to me, that's a very nice, succinct way of describing a journey with the principles. It's not a place that we get to, it's not a physical location, and I think it truly is a journey without a final destination. And even the new way of looking at things is not something we just experience once, is it? It's something that we get a glimpse, and then we get a further glimpse if we're fortunate, and then another, and then we see more as we go on. And it is truly the gift that keeps giving. So I want to talk a little bit about my own journey into this understanding and through to where I am now. I'm also like to mention a few bits of Sydney Banks' journey, because I've always been inspired not just by the body of work that people leave, but also how they got there. That's always spoken to me, going right back to when I was in my teens. For whatever reason, just following my own wisdom, I didn't know I was doing that then. So it's interesting to me how we can be on a journey with the principles long before we've heard about the principles, because they're already operating. And then at a certain point, someone introduces us to this and we go, oh, that makes sense of a whole bunch of things. So that was certainly the case for me. My journey really, I would say, began as an 8-year-old boy growing up in the north of England. And I grew up in a small town on the edge of moorland. It was just kind of nature where I'd spend most of my time when I wasn't in school or at home. And one summer's day, when I was about 8, I remember being up on the hills with my friends, 2 friends, and momentarily I lost track of them. And what I can recollect still was that it was a hot summer's day. There was very long grass, which was almost as tall as I was. And I found myself on my own in this long grass. And then suddenly, what appeared to happen was that the grass seemed to be shimmering, as if it was full of light. And initially I thought it was just a trick of the sunlight. But as I looked more closely, I realized that wasn't what I was seeing. It looked like the grass was illuminated from inside. I was like, whoa. And of course I wanted to tell my friends, but I was afraid that if I turned away, it would kind of break the spell or something. So I was transfixed, literally. And first it was just the grass right in front of me, and then it seemed to start spreading, and then it was also the shrubs and the trees, and it was as far as I could see. Everything was shimmering. And then I noticed that I too was shimmering, or when I say I, my own physical body was the same. And I suddenly realized that there was no place where I could see that I ended and that began. That somehow my sense of being a separate, contained individual, it just dissolved like this. And yet I was fully aware, fully conscious, and the feeling was one of, it was terrific joy and elation. And also, I want to use the word invincibility. I had this feeling like nothing can harm me, because there isn't anything separate from me. That was the feeling. I was like, whoa. It was incredible, incredible experience. It maybe lasted just a few seconds or a minute or two, I really can't say. And then gradually, the light seemed to fade, and I was back into my physical form and chasing after my friends. And I was like, did that just happen? Did that really just happen? But I knew it did. And I knew it was something that I hadn't made happen. It had just spontaneously happened. And I didn't speak about it to anyone for years. What are you supposed to say about an experience like that? I didn't tell my parents, I didn't tell my friends. I didn't know what it was. I see now that I had an experience of universal consciousness. I was aware of the fact that my consciousness was no longer confined within my own frame, that somehow it was one consciousness altogether. But I didn't know anything about thought at that point. So when it kind of dissipated as quickly as it came, it was like I'd glimpsed something, and then the curtain came back and, okay, go get on with your life. So that's what I did. But it's a strange thing when you've seen something that you can't unsee, isn't it? It kind of niggles at you. And I can honestly say that set me on my journey of seeking, searching for answers, trying to understand. How is it that we're living in this everyday world where everything's material and solid and separate and so on? And yet I know I've got this kind of secret knowledge. As far as I was aware, I was the only one who knew this at the time. I've got this secret knowledge that it's not really like this. That actually there's this hidden dimension where everything is one buzzing field of consciousness or energy, and it's filled with this beautiful, loving, joyous feeling. So I felt like I've got a foot in two camps now. And that was, in one sense, you could say it was a blessing. I was blessed with that experience, but it was also a bit of a curse, because I couldn't shake it off, but I couldn't make it come back either. I couldn't really recreate the experience. So, what I knew to do was, and I can't tell you how I knew this, was to follow what felt like the thing that interested me, which is to follow my interest. And I'm very grateful to my parents that they didn't try to impose their ideas of what they thought I should be doing very much at all. That was really the best gift that they could have given me. So I became interested in plants and trees and herbs. And then I discovered that they were actually medicines, which was fascinating to me. And I discovered the Bach flower remedies as a teenager. You've probably heard of the rescue remedy, if nothing else. And I read the life story of Dr. Edward Bach, who was a Harley Street doctor in the early 1900s. Very successful. And he'd reached kind of the pinnacle of his career. And then suddenly he realized, I have to give this up. This is not what I'm here to do. He felt he had a higher calling. So he resigned from his clinic. He gave away all his possessions. And he went out into the countryside with no plan. He just felt that that's what he needed to do. And he wandered around the fields and the hedgerows of southern England, and sometimes in Wales as well. And he'd find himself in a particular frame of mind or emotional state, and then he would be intuitively drawn to a particular flower that had a certain resonance for that feeling state. And he was inspired to create these essences using a method that no one else had used before, as far as we're aware. And I remember reading, again, I read the story of his life, and I was just so inspired by the courage of that. Turning his back on what anyone else would look at as a dream career, and he's at the top of his game. He's got a great salary and everything, and the prestige that goes with being with a Harley Street doctor. And yet something in him said, there's more for you. And he followed it. And in one of his books, I read this line, again, still as a teenager. He said, there's no true healing unless there is a change in outlook and peace of mind. No true healing unless there's a change in outlook and peace of mind. I remember reading that, and something in me went, that's true. I recognized the truth of that. Isn't that strange? How we can recognize the truth of something. And it is, to me, it's an experience of recognition. And recognition means to know again. If you break the word down, you can only recognize that which is already familiar somehow. And that, in a way, set me on my path of trusting whatever I came across that looked to me like true. It's close to being true. Whenever I recognized that feeling of truth, I followed it. And it started with the writings of Edward Bach and his life story. And then I discovered homeopathy. And there was another story, a bit like the same. This German physician, Samuel Hahnemann, had given up the practice of medicine in the late 1700s in Germany. He was so disillusioned with how bad the results were and how brutal the treatment. And he's making his living as a translator just so he could feed his family. And he's reading this book, and boom, suddenly he gets a massive insight. And he discovered a principle of healing, which he said was a principle of nature that had always been there. And he started to discover there's references to it all the way back to the Greek physicians, Hippocrates, and beyond. So he didn't invent homeopathy, but he created a system of healing based on this principle that had always been there. And again, I read that story and I was like so inspired. He'd given up what he was supposed to be doing. He's following his own heart, his own conscience, and then he gets gifted with this realization. He recognized the truth of it immediately, and when he followed it, the results were so superior to what his peers and colleagues were obtaining that people were flocking from far and wide to experience the treatment. So that became my career path. I was so inspired by Hahnemann's example, I decided I'm going to learn this thing. And I started buying homeopathy books, and by serendipity, people started gifting me things. Someone gifted me a remedy kit, which had little cork stoppers. It was this ancient little bottles. And someone else gave me a set of books. And around this time, I came across the work for the first time of a guy called Joseph Campbell. Any of you know Joseph Campbell? So he became famous. He published a book in the 1940s called The Hero with 1,000 Faces. And he was a student of all the mythologies of all the world. The mythologies, the religions, the traditions, the folklore. And he saw that while the external forms are different characters, different locations, the underlying message is always the same. It's always pointing in the same direction. And he called it the kind of the meta-myth or the monomyth of humanity. He called it the hero's journey. And when it's depicted in story form, it usually describes someone often giving up the familiar, either by choice or often not by choice. It's often an involuntary act. A person is forced to leave the security of their hometown or their job or whatever, and they find themselves in a strange place, in a new, unfamiliar surrounding. So you got the call to adventure, as he called it, which might be involuntary at times, and then the adventure itself, which often involves slaying dragons and overcoming all kinds of obstacles and so on, and then eventually some kind of treasure is discovered or uncovered. You find the gold of one form or another, and then you've got to turn around and find your way back, all the way back into life with the gift that you've been gifted with, and find a way to bring that into the world, which is very, very challenging in itself, very difficult. But again, I was very inspired by Campbell's story. He was a living example of the hero's journey, and he taught this to his students, and one of his phrases that, again, really impacted me when I heard it, he said, I just tell my students, follow your bliss. He said, follow your bliss and doors will open where you didn't even know there were doors. And that there wouldn't be doors for anybody else. And again, something in me recognized the truth of that. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to run the experiment. I believed him, but it was more than a belief. It was a knowing that that's how it actually works. I thought, well, what does it mean to follow my bliss? It means to give myself the freedom to explore whatever it is I feel most interested in, whatever it is that when I come across it, it kind of lights me up. It touches some of that feeling of illumination that I'd experienced as an 8-year-old. It's not quite the same, but it's an echo of the same. It lights you up from the inside. It gives you a sense of enthusiasm and possibility. So that became my navigation system. Again, still in my teens, my late teens by this point, I'm now navigating just by that feeling of, does this actually light me up? Does it strike a chord? Does it ring a bell? Isn't it interesting that we use acoustic metaphors in relationship to when we recognize something on the outside that has a resonance with something on the inside? So I was entering the field of resonant phenomena, which turns out that's actually how homeopathy works. I didn't know this at the time. I discovered this later on. It's an energy medicine, and the remedy has to resonate. The frequency of the remedy has to resonate with the state of the person. Otherwise, it just goes straight past them. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't cause any harm, but there's no healing either. But when the remedy is in the right frequency, so to speak, they need so little of it that this is why homeopathy is often dismissed by people. They say, it's ridiculous, how can you give something that's been diluted so many times? There's nothing even in it. And yet the person could take literally one tablet or one sniff and their life changes. It acts as a catalyst for inner transformation and healing. So it's a resonance phenomena. And to me, sharing the principles is also a resonance phenomena. By the way, we'll come back to that. So I just kept following what feels to me like a breadcrumb trail. I've stumbled into the fact that there was a training in homeopathy. I never knew, there was no internet in those days. So I was studying by myself for quite a few years, blissfully unaware that there was a college where you could actually go and train to be a homeopath. And by some wonderful serendipity, I helped a guy whose car was stuck in the mud, and as a thank you, he took me to the pub to buy me dinner, and when we got to the pub, he took off his jacket and he's wearing a sweatshirt that says College of Homeopathy. And I'm looking at him with my eyes on stalks. There's a College of Homeopathy? And he's like, yeah, of course. I said, where is it? He said, it's in London. It's like, okay, I'm moving to London. That was it. I'd always lived in the north of England up till that point. Never been to London in my life. There was no hesitation. What was it? Natasha was saying, if it's more than one, it's not the answer, right? I loved how she described that. You know, should I go to London? Should I not go to? There was none of that. It's like, I'm going to London. Bye-bye parents, and bye-bye life. And that's what I did. I moved to London with no money, with no plan, knowing that I was going to study this thing. This was my career path. And I loved it. I loved the experience of being a student. I left school at 16, so I'd never been to university or college before. I was the youngest person in the class. Everybody else was about twice my age. They were all coming to homeopathy as a second career. And I absolutely loved it. And I thought I was training to be a practitioner, which I was, until one day, somewhere in the second year of the training, this extraordinary teacher came in. His name was Robin Murphy. He came over from the US. It was the first time he'd ever taught in the UK. And normally I was used to teachers coming in, they'd have reams of notes, just like just like Sue. Sometimes they'd be showing slides and we had to write everything down, and we'd go out with reams of notes. And this guy, Robin, he comes in, he's got no notes. He just sits at the front of the room and he just starts talking, and I was transfixed. And he was speaking from a place inside of himself that I'd never heard anyone speak before. And I felt it. I was like, whoa. And I had this thought occurs to me. Bear in mind, before that moment, I'd always been very, very shy and insecure. So as a young boy, if people that I didn't know came to the house, I used to hide behind the furniture, right? I was really shy, like painfully shy. So, and even as a student, you know, I would kind of just keep my head down and take notes and not draw attention to myself. A bit like Sydney Banks describes himself. I would have probably called myself an insecure person too. I'm listening to Robin, and this thought occurs to me, I want his job. I want his job. Why? Because of the way that I felt in his presence. I just felt so inspired and so empowered. I thought, God, I don't need to wait till the end of this training. I'm ready. I'm good to go. I know this. That's basically was his message. He wasn't saying that in words, but that's what he was conveying. It's like, you already know this. Trust yourself. Go out and use what you already know and heal the people that come to you that you're able to help with this wonderful system of healing. I was like, whoa. All my fears dissipated. All my sense of, you know, I'm not ready, I'm not confident, I don't know enough. All of that disappeared. Boom, I was away. So I was not only a practitioner, I was a teacher now. Literally from one moment to the next. Isn't that cool? How something can be dormant. We don't even know that it's there. And then it gets activated at a certain moment in one's life. Just like Edward Barch, you know, he's a successful doctor, and then boom, something in him says, okay, you're done with that now. Here's the next chapter. So I think that all of our life journeys contain these hidden chapters that, you know, often we're on the threshold of without knowing it, sometimes for quite a long period. And then suddenly one day we discover, oh, I've crossed the threshold. And there's no going back. And that's true. All heroes' journeys involve a threshold. And once you cross it, there is no going back. I mean, you might try. We do try because we like the familiar. And sometimes we try and keep a foot in both camps for a while. Has anyone done that? Yeah, I'm just going to keep my regular job because it pays the bills, you know, while I build up my coaching practice. Yeah. Yeah, how's that working out for you? Yeah. People say to me, how did you get to be so successful so quickly creating a practice? I said it was really easy. I didn't consider any other option. And I'm not joking. I didn't have a plan B. I didn't have a backup. I didn't have something else to fall back on. So when you put yourself in that position, you're going to succeed, right? It's going to happen. I just had that inner certainty about it that Natasha was describing. And I had Joseph Campbell echoing in the background of my awareness. Just follow your bliss and doors will open. You don't need to know which doors or where and when. They'll open when you're ready to cross through them. I was like, okay, that seems to be how it works. So I moved back up to the north of England, opened a practice, boom, people started appearing. No one had even heard of homeopathy at this point. Literally, no one had any idea what it was, so I thought, okay, I'm going to have to start teaching people. Good job I got inspired to be a teacher. So I started doing evening classes and talks. I'd never done that in my life. Had no idea what I was talking about. The first one I did, there were 3 people came. 2 of them were my parents. Actually, true. That is actually true. They were very proud. I was a little bit embarrassed, but undeterred. For me, I just saw it as a practice run. I thought, it's okay, I'm just finding my feet. There's at least one new person here. And the next one, there were maybe 5 or 6 people. Next one, there was a dozen. Pretty soon, we had to find a bigger location. The thing kept going. Once I was doing talks, that fed into the practice. Once people had learned with me up to a certain point, I was helping them to be home prescribers so they could treat their own kids, their own pets, and they loved it. And then they get to a point they say, yeah, but Ian, we want your job. We want to be homeopaths too. It's like, well, okay, there's these colleges you can go to, there's one in London. No, we want to train with you. I thought, oh, it took me a while to let that in. That we're all selective. Again, this is resonance. Yeah, I didn't fully understand this at the time. I was always fobbing people off and trying to send them somewhere else. And I couldn't get rid of them. They would just stick around. They'd refuse to go away. It's like, okay, then we're just going to wait until you open a college. I was like, oh, bugger. So eventually I realized that's what I had to do. So as soon as I opened a college, whoom, it was completely full from day one. It was amazing. And again, no big effort on my part, but there was a readiness and a willingness just to step into that next chapter. And I continued my practice and my teaching for the next 15 years. I wrote some homeopathy books, so I became well known in that field, and I started to get invited to teach at other colleges and overseas, and it was just amazing. It was like, wow, just like Joseph Campbell said, doors will open where you didn't even know there were doors. That's what started to happen. And then one day, there were two events that occurred with particular clients. One was a lady that came to me, and I treated her for over a year, and she'd come back diligently. She's what you call a good patient, you know. She kept coming back, and she'd tell me the symptoms, and I'd work out the remedy, and I'd give her the remedy, and she'd come back, and the symptoms were a bit different, but I'd give her a different remedy, and she'd go away, and she'd come back. And we did this, but I had that niggling feeling I wasn't really getting to the bottom of it. She didn't seem concerned about that, but I was. And then at some point, she didn't come back anymore. And I thought, well, I don't blame her. You know, she's paying me all this money and nothing's really happening. Anyway, I contacted her sometime later to just to check in on her. And she said, oh, it's funny you should call me. She said, I've just been thinking about you. I was going to book an appointment to come back in. Interesting. Hadn't seen her for about 6 months. So she came back in. She said, let's not talk on the phone. I'll come back. She came back in, and I kind of confessed, you know. I said, look, I know I treated you for all this time. I gave you all these remedies, but I don't really feel like I got the one that was the one you really needed. I'm not even sure why you kept coming back, to be honest. Then she says, well, I've got a confession too. And she pulled out this carrier bag and plonked it on my desk, and it's got all the remedies that I'd given her that she hadn't taken. Which she'd taken the first two, I think, and then after that they were unopened. She hadn't even opened them. And so we just sat looking at each other. I thought, this is interesting. And I was, well, why did you keep coming back? And she said, well, I was going through a really difficult life transition at the time. She said, I didn't tell you half the story. I didn't need to. Here's what she said. She said, there was something in the way that you listened that was really different and helpful to me at that time. She said, everybody else in my life had an agenda. They were taking sides, and they were giving me advice. They were telling me what to do. She said, you didn't do any of that. You just listened. And sometimes you asked me a question that just caused me to reflect or whatever. And she said, I'd always go away feeling a lot clearer and knowing what to do next. I'd come in feeling confused. I'd go away feeling clear on my next step. She said, I can't tell you how valuable that was. And I'm like, huh? She was getting all of that out of our sessions. I thought I was doing homeopathy. I still had my homeopathic hat on, so I said to her, well, wasn't there any of these remedies that were helpful to you? She's like, no, it wasn't about the remedies to me. I said, well, why did you keep telling me your symptoms so that I could work out a remedy? Do you know what she said? She said, you seem to need to keep giving them to me. It's like, the game's up, right? I couldn't argue with that. So that really stopped me in my tracks. And what became visible to me was that healing, remember Edward Barcher's description of healing? No true healing unless there's a change in outlook and peace of mind. That's what she told me she was going away with. She told me there's something in the way that you were listening to me and not judging me that enabled me to have a change in outlook. And I went away with this clarity and knowing what to do. I thought, my God, that's healing. That's why she knew intuitively she didn't need the remedies. It wasn't about the remedies. She was getting the healing that she needed. And my next thought was, well, if it's true for one, it's probably true for a few more. So I suddenly started thinking about my other clients. I realized it was about 1/3 of my practice were not really coming to me for the remedies. It had just been invisible to me that I was doing this other work without really realizing it. And once it became visible, I thought, well, actually that's the best bit of my job. That's the bit I enjoy more than anything else, is having that space where people can find their own answers and they can reconnect to their own potential and their own inner knowing. So I was already, in a sense, doing the work that I'm doing now. I was just fumbling my way into it by following that, again, that inner guidance system, as we call it. Now, the next pivotal moment for me, my practice, this is when I was getting a bit burnt out. I was teaching all over the place. We had a college with 3 different branches and all of this. My practice was going crazy. And one day the window cleaner came. So I'm sat with a client. I'm not listening to the client. I'm watching the window cleaner. He's doing the windows. He's giving me a little wave, and I'm giving him a wave. And I had the thought, I want his job. And then I realized, no, I don't. My brother used to do window cleaning. It's a hellish job in the winter. I thought, I don't want to be a window cleaner. What I want is how it looks to me like he feels. And what does that look like? He looked carefree, and I was full of care. I was burdened at the time. I hadn't realized it. I got bogged down. I was feeling personally responsible for all the health and well-being of my clients. And the more clients I had, the more that burden of responsibility was weighing on me. I hadn't realized, because I loved my work, but I hadn't realized how bogged down I was getting. So again, that was a wake-up. It's like, oh, okay, there's a lot I need to let go of here. So I went home and I made a list. I took a sheet of A4. On the left column was everything that I don't look forward to in my job anymore. It was a very long list. It was most of what I was doing. And when I thought of it, most of the things on that list began with the word should, ought to, have to. It was all the things that I thought I had to do as a practicing homeopath. And on the other side, at the top of the column, I wrote energizes. What is it that still energizes me? What still brings me alive? All I could think of was this lady who'd told me, something in the way that you listen helps me to get clear and have my own realizations. I thought, it's that. I want to do that. I only want to do that. That's all I'm interested in. It's the inner transformation aspect of this work. So I let everything else go and I just focused on that. Everybody thought I was crazy. I thought I was crazy. It made no sense financially. It was ridiculous. Gave up several thriving businesses. But I felt like I was following in Edward Barch's footsteps. You know, it's exactly what he did. He built up this wonderful practice, and then he realized he had to let it all go. I thought, okay, I'm in good company here, let's go. So I let it all go, and I just continued to work, but I told my clients I'm working in a different way now. I'm not really using remedies anymore. It's all about what happens in this space between you and I. Of course, most of them left and went to one of my homeopathic colleagues, but a few stuck around because they were curious or because they already knew that there was something else of value. And then, after a short while, my fellow homeopaths started sending me the clients that they couldn't help. The ones that they'd given a bag full of remedies to, and the person was still struggling. It's like, go see Ian. What's he doing? We don't know, but it's good stuff. We don't think he knows, but he's on to something. I mean, it was literally like that. And meanwhile, what I was doing was I started relearning or retraining in lots of anything I could find that felt like it would be a good fit for how I wanted to work. So I started learning with, I learned something called journey process work, like inner journey work, emotional release work, Byron Katie work, EFT tapping work. A lot of it was emotional related because I saw that when people are struggling, they're usually struggling with how they feel. And so I knew that that was a big component of what my work was about. And I knew that was true for me too. So everything I was learning, it was really for me. And if I found that it helped me, then I'd bring it into my practice. And I ended up with a toolkit of things. So that was another 9 years journey, post-homeopathy. And then I got to this point where, although I had a good toolkit of different things, I had the feeling that when people would come in with their issues, I had this nagging feeling that we could work on their issues till one of us died. And we'd never get to the end of it. Do you ever have that feeling? And something in me rebelled against that idea. I don't like this idea that, I help the person with issue A, and then a couple of weeks later they come back with issue B and we start all over again. And sometimes what worked really well that time, it doesn't work at all, so I've got to try something else. And I just had this feeling of like, I'm going round and round in circles, and there's something missing in my work. Again, it was my own internal dissatisfaction. My clients weren't complaining, but something in me was still looking. And that's when I was introduced to the understanding of the principles. And when I first listened to the recordings of Sydney Banks, again, it was like this recognition of what's true. It's like, oh my God, it's so much simpler than I thought it was. And the first insight I had was about insight itself. Because when I heard him talk about insight, as insight is the only thing that changes people from the inside out. It's when they have their own realization. I was like, oh my God, that's what was happening for that lady who knew that she didn't need the remedies. She's just having her own insight. Wow. And then I realized insight is not dependent on tools and techniques or anything else. So all the things that I thought were the necessary precursors to make change happen, Sid was saying, no, it's built into us to have insight. All you've got to do is allow your mind to settle, and that creates a space for insight, and you've got to trust what comes to you. And it will, but you'll be given what you need. If you trust it, it'll be exactly what you need. I was like, okay, let's run that experiment and see what happens. So my work was suddenly a whole lot simpler. I put down the toolkit, and now I've got one job. My only job is to create a space within which people can have their own realizations, their own insights, as best I can. And I knew that I couldn't force people to have insight, but I knew what was more conducive and I knew what was less conducive. And that was enough. Yeah? If a person came in and they're very busy and they're trying to figure it all out, I knew that wasn't a conducive space for insight. So then my job is just to hang out with them till they settle down, till the mind relaxes. And I could see when that happened, and then they'd get a bit quieter and I'd get quieter, and the pauses would get a bit longer, and then they'd go, something's just occurred to me, Ian. And I was like, okay, tell me more. And that was it. And it seemed like nothing, It seemed like nothing, which to me I loved because it was very homeopathic, right? There was so little in it, and yet it was so transformative. It was so powerful. So that became the direction of my work, and you could say the rest is history. I lucked out because I dropped into a training which only ever happened once in the UK with Mark Howard and Kathy Casey. It was a practitioner training. They were both wonderful teachers. I had such a good time. Even though by that point I'd sworn I'm not doing a single training ever again in my whole life. As soon as I heard about that one, my mind's saying, I can't afford it, I don't want to do it, I don't have the time. By the way, where do I sign? You ever have that experience? Your mind's got one idea and your body has got another? It was one of those. And as soon as I met them and started on the train, I knew I was in the right place. I had that feeling of certainty. This is right for me. Just do this, keep doing this. And because I'd already worked a lot with groups, done a lot of trainings and stuff, what made sense to me was not to go and be an individual Three Principles practitioner. I couldn't quite see how that could work exactly, so I just decided to do group trainings right off the bat. I remember talking to Kathy about that. She said, what are you going to do here? I said, my feeling is I'm just going to run groups and trainings and retreats and workshops. I was like, is that okay? She's like, what are you waiting for? Obviously it's okay, because that's what you feel like doing. That's what you're drawn to do. So I started there, and then gradually the one-to-one work came in on the back of that. So I want to reassure those of you who, maybe are stumbling on the first steps on that journey of maybe finding your feet as a practitioner, that we all stumble. It's normal. And sometimes it does feel like 2 steps forward and 3 back, and it feels like that to me as well. But you do have a way of course correcting. You can course correct all the time. If you're putting a lot of effort and energy into something and it's just not working out, you're not following your bliss. You're either copying what someone else is doing and trying to make that work, or you're telling yourself what you should be doing. and thinking that will work. Neither of those are following your bliss. Following your bliss is when you just relax and you just trust, and you wait for something really clear to come to you, and you do that as a first step. And then you do that again. It's like rinse, repeat. Just keep doing that, one step at a time. Call that person, give that talk, put that flyer out, whatever it is. It's usually just a series of small incremental things, and you're on your way. So that's been my journey with getting into the principles. I mean, it's a very short version, if you like, but what I loved about when I read Sid's, or listened to Sid describe his own journey, I mean, I don't know his whole life story, but we know what the bits that he's talked about in his public talks, and I've heard some interviews with his son and with people that knew him well. So I've listened closely to those, because as I said, I'm always interested in how does the person get there? You know, what's their story? Interesting to me that he was a welder by trade. Welding is the art of taking things that have been separated and joining them together in a new way. Isn't that interesting? And he talks about bringing together psychology and spirituality, and turns that into what we know as the understanding of the principles. So I like to think of Sid still being a welder, you know, even when he's having spiritual insight, he's bringing things together in a new way and then presenting that to the world. He had his own, you could say, hero's journey of when he and his wife, his first wife, Barb, were struggling, and they got persuaded to go on a couples retreat at a place called Cold Mountain, which just sounds horrible, doesn't it? And he said he knew it was a bad idea, because at that time it was all encounter groups and everybody was yelling at each other and beating up pillows and what have you. And he was an insecure, shy person like I used to be, so it was the last thing he wanted to be doing. And he said he rang up twice and cancelled it. He booked it twice and cancelled it twice. And then he booked it a third time. Isn't that interesting? I can't tell you how many folk tales involve someone having to do something 3 times. Not twice, but 3 times. You know, we have the saying, knock 3 times. Things run in threes. Yeah. Every month we have 3 days darkness before the new moon reappears. Jonah goes into the belly of the whale 3 days, 3 nights. Jesus dies, goes into the tomb 3 days, 3 nights. Then there's a resurrection. Right? Sydney Banks knocks 3 times. On the 3rd time he commits himself against his own better judgment. He goes to Cold Mountain. He's completely out of his comfort zone. He'd never been to anything like this in his life. He hated it from the minute he gets there. His wife too. They're like, what the hell have we let ourselves in for? And then, before they're about to leave, they're going to leave early to get the hell out of this place. In a chance conversation with someone who he's never met before, boom, he has his insight. My lifelong insecurity is not the truth of who I am, it's thought. It's been created by this invisible power of thought. Who knew? And he says to the guy, he's like, do you realize what you've just shared? The guy, yeah, of course. And he said, I knew he didn't. I knew he didn't. It's so sweet. And then he said, after that, he said, it was like this bomb goes off in his brain. He said, I didn't sleep for 3 days and 3 nights. Right? That's exactly what he said. He said, I couldn't sleep, I was just buzzing with energy. And he said it was like downloads. You know, he said all of this knowledge was just flooding into him. And visibly he changed. People were shocked. You know, some people didn't recognize him. Many people didn't know how to relate to him anymore, because he wasn't the Sid that they were used to. He said it was very strange. He said, I knew that I was still speaking English, but people would look at him when he spoke as if he'd just switched into some foreign language. Like there was just this bafflement on their face. He said it was so strange. And yet, he'd crossed the threshold. He couldn't unsee what he'd seen, and he couldn't go back to being the old Sydney Banks. He knew that he could only go forward with what he'd been gifted with. And then he has further realizations on the back of that. And then the psychologists show up. And this is an interesting development, wasn't it? People say, well, why did you decide to put it out through psychology? He said, I didn't decide. That's what showed up. He said, had they been engineers or physicists, I would have shared it with them. Yeah, and it would have gone into those fields. They just happened to be psychologists and a few psychiatrists. So he just trusted the process itself. He trusted the deeper intelligence at work. Well, these are the guys that have shown up. I guess I better teach them as best I can. What does he discover? He discovers that most of them haven't got the ears to hear it. They don't have the receptivity because they've got so many pre-existing ideas of what's necessary for people to heal from trauma and difficulty and all of that. It sounds too simple, Sid. It can't be that simple. So it went over most of their heads. Fortunately, there were a few that could hear it. The ones that we know and love in the Three Principles community became the teachers, but it was a very, very small percentage of the ones who passed through his workshops and talks. And so he said he had to write the books. He said, I didn't want to write books. I had no intention of being a writer. He said, I decided to write fiction books to bypass the professionals. Isn't that cute? He had to find a way to get his message out. And he said, if the professionals are just going to mess it up and turn it into something complicated, it's going to get diluted and people are going to miss it. So he started writing his fiction books. Now, interestingly, all of his fiction books involve someone going on a journey. So you got the first two, Second Chance. You got this character who's struggling in his life and he's got sick, he's got his diagnosis, and he decides to go to Hawaii. And while he's in Hawaii, he has this chance encounter with someone who seems to have this deep wisdom. And the process that unfolds is kind of a mentor-student relationship, you could say, which I would say very much echoed the kind of relationship that Sid himself was having with the people that were close to him. People were just kind of stumbling through life. They had no idea what to do, and they were full of ideas and intellect. And yet there was this simplicity to the answers that were coming through Sid and from Sid. So he reflected that in his first two books, the second one being Quest for the Pearl. And then he writes Enlightened Gardener, and Enlightened Gardener Revisited, which is, again, this is a story of some bumbling psychologists who go to a conference, right? See, if they'd gone to a Viva, they'd have been fine. But they went to a bloody conference. And what do they find? That it's all in the intellect, it's all very heady, it's not particularly helpful, and so on. So they decide to bunk off the classes and hang out in the gardens. And who did they discover? The Enlightened Gardener. This humble, simple human being who's taking care of the grounds. He's not a psychologist, he doesn't have a degree in anything, but he seems to know a thing or two. He's got a way of seeing things that the psychologists don't have. Now, I heard someone who knew Sydney Banks, I can't remember who it was, it might have been Linda Quiring, talking about when they used to have little gatherings in his house and on the beach. They said Sid used to love playing movies. It's like he'd sometimes get those VHS tapes and he'd say, come on, we're going to have a movie, we're going to have a movie night. Do you know what they said? They said one of his favourite movies was that Peter Sellers one called Being There. Oh, yeah. You know that movie? I couldn't believe it when I heard that. That was one of the most impactful movies I ever saw in my life. Guess what the story is? It's a gardener who's a bit of a simpleton. And you got these other people who are struggling and up against it and what have you. And they go to this garden, and this gardener just kind of says stuff, and they go like, oh my God, where's he getting this wisdom from? He's the Enlightened Gardener. Isn't that cool? That's probably where he got his inspiration. I don't know. I like to think it probably is. And then he writes the last fiction book, Dear Liza. I decided to run the experiment a couple of weeks ago. I've read Dear Liza. I'd already read it, I think, 5 times. And I thought, I wonder if I read it a 6th time, am I still going to burst into tears at the end? Has anyone else had that experience reading Dear Liza? And I didn't have high expectations. I thought the chances are, come on, I even know the end before I start the beginning, right? And it's a short book, I know what's going to happen. If you haven't read it, it's like a Dickensian tale set in London in the 1800s, in the situation of poverty. And this guy, who's obviously not from that area, he's a wealthy homeowner, landowner, kind of lord of the manor type, gets a bit lost, finds himself in these dirty, filthy streets, So he's on his little journey, right? He's away from his familiar ground. He's in the unfamiliar. He's a bit scared. His butler's trying to tell him, you know, we should go home, sir. It's not safe here. And he has an encounter with a little girl, a child. And this time, the mentor is the child, which is such a beautiful image. The child is the one that has the wisdom. The adult is the one who has to be humble enough to listen to what the child has to share. It did make me cry once again. It made me sob, actually. I was even sobbing reading it again. I was like, this is unbelievable. How can a book that I already know the plot and the ending, how can it have such an impact? I don't know. It's a resonance phenomenon. I imagine one day I'll read it and it won't have that effect, but I haven't got there yet. But we'll see. So for me, there's like journeys within journeys. You know, I think Sid had his journey with the psychologist coming and then deciding he had to write books and put it out that way. He got invited to university and then it only lasted a while and then that didn't work out. He had to close it down and do something else. He was course correcting all the time, trying things, trying to find the best way to put it out there. I think we're all doing that to the best of our ability. We're all on our own individual journey. And then we get the micro journeys in the midst of daily life. You know, I say to people, anyone who's learning this, you don't have to go looking for raw material to show you where your understanding is. Because daily life will present you with raw material all the time to show you where both your understanding and your misunderstanding is. Like, example, when I came here, I thought it's a good idea maybe to go have a Thai massage. Anyone else have that idea? It's a good idea, isn't it? They've got several nice Thai massage parlors. I've been there before. I'd forgotten actually what it's like, but I decided to go on Thursday last week. So I booked myself a Thai massage and I went in and said, which one do you want? I thought I'm going to have the gentle one, the massage with oils. Right? I don't want that one where she's walking on my back, you know, digging her elbows in. So I go for the gentle one. She said, okay. She said, take off clothes and remove underwear and put these on. She gave me this little envelope. She said, put these on and then lie on couch face down in the hole. That was the instructions. She said, I'll come back in 2 minutes. I was like, okay. I better get my clothes off quickly. So I undress. I thought, okay, what was the instructions again? Yeah, take clothes off, remove underwear. I got my underwear out. I thought, I better be quick. She'll be back in 2 minutes. And put this on. I thought, what's this? I'd forgotten. So I opened this. It looked like a tea bag envelope. It was about... that was about the size. So I opened it up and it still looked like a tea bag of some kind, but it was sort of paper, some sort of paper underwear, I think is what it was. I thought, well, that's nice, that's very hygienic, obviously, I'll put that on. So I put the paper underwear on, and I thought my 2 minutes is probably up, I better get on the couch, lie down, get my head in the hole. At which point I realised that this paper underwear has a back and a front. And I don't think I had them on the right way. I really don't want to leave you with that image, but... yeah. So I had to do a quick get them off, get them on again before she comes in, get on the couch, get my head in the hole. It's quite difficult. You know when you're at the dentist and he's got all this stuff in your mouth and then he starts asking you about your holidays, you know, like, it was like that. Although I've got my head in the hole. And she's like, are you on holiday? It's quite difficult to have a conversation when you've got a head in a hole. But anyway, I had a nice massage. It was very relaxing. And I'm still lying there thinking, I'm still not sure I've got them on the right way. Even though I'd swapped them around, I wasn't convinced. But I finished the massage and I'm going to pay, and she said, would you like some water? I said, yes, thank you. She said, would you like a sweet? And they've got a glass jar full of different kinds of sweets. I said, oh yeah, that would be nice. She said, these are Haribo. I said, they don't taste too bad. So to me, every day is full of opportunities for little journeys. You know, it's like you've got the life journey, and then you've got the micro journeys. It's like the commute to work is a little journey. Dropping the kids off at school, it's a little journey. And each day, each time you do it is different. It's going to present opportunities to see where you get caught, where you overthink, where you get lost. And also when you notice that and you go, oh, okay, that's all that is. I was just getting a bit insecure about this paper underwear. Yeah. Oh well, what's the worst that could happen? And you relax again. But and for me, every time I work with someone, I do some limited amount of individual work now as well. When I work with an individual, I feel like we go on a little journey together. You know, each session again is a micro journey, and then if we work over a period of time, it feels like we go on a journey together. And I feel the same with trainings. If I do a group training, which I love to do, it's like the group is unique and different each time. We don't know where the destination is, but we kind of know the orientation. And I feel that that's enough. For me, this understanding gives us an orientation, not a final destination. And that orientation is what we can always come back to. We can get a feel for if we're heading in a direction that's helpful or not. And that's all we need to know. And both are okay, because if it's not, well, you course correct, right? How else would you know? I had a client came to me. She said she was clairvoyant. That was her profession. I said, how can I help you? She said, I've got pre-traumatic stress disorder. Think about it. But Sid was very critical, particularly about Freudian psychologists. He didn't have much time for the Freudians. I don't know whether he encountered a whole bunch of them or it was just from his reading and so on, but I think maybe the fact that they emphasized going into the past to try and find the answers and so on, he wasn't. I thought it was a bit harsh on the Freudians, to be honest. I mean, they gave us Freudian slips, right? You all know, Freudian slip is, it's like, when you say one thing but you mean your mother, It's like that, isn't it? Which reminds me of a joke. There's two Freudian psychologists. It's like, how many Freudians does it take to change a light bulb? You know that one? Yeah. The answer is 2. There's one to change the bulb, and the other one to hold the penis. The ladder. I meant ladder. But, okay. One of the things I really, really appreciate about this work is, for me, it doesn't really feel like work. It feels, when I was watching that window cleaner, it feels like I've got his job now, except I'm not cleaning windows. It feels like I can have that relationship to my work that is light and somewhat carefree. It's not that I don't care about the people I'm working with, I do, but I don't have that burden of care that I used to have before. So it's a different kind of relationship. We're hanging out together, we're in it together. It's not my job to be the expert. That, to me, is the best news. It's like we don't have to be the expert in this, with this understanding. We just got to hold the space and listen well, and be a good reflecting mirror as best we can, and trust that the person will find their own answers. And they do. They do. We've got to be patient sometimes, but that's okay. We can do that. So, I just want to close with this is a quote which I love. It's in the immortal words of T.S. Eliot, who also wrote about journeys. He said, "We will not cease in our exploration, and the end of all of our exploring will be to arrive where we started, but to know it for the first time." And to me, it's very much like that. It's like that. It's that having fresh eyes for the familiar as best we can. not dragging the past along, not being lost in the imaginary future, but just being alive to what's actually here in this room right now, which is all you beautiful people together, getting ready for dinner, I hope. Is that what's happening? Yes. So with that, thank you all so much. It's been a pleasure hanging out with you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much again.
My pleasure.